So PGL recently unveiled something that they call Oracle Observing that they'll be using at their major coming up this July. Before I actually get into my thoughts about it, I'm going to explain what it actually is. I'll also link the Reddit post that they made in the description below for anyone that actually just wants to read what they said themselves. So at the PGL major, there's going to be two main observers. That's going to be Prius and Sapphire. And what they'll be responsible for is the main observer stream as well as the Oracle. There'll also be three other observers who are responsible for like the replays and the cinematic cams, etc. I assume from PGL they've been very good at that kind of thing for as long as they've been around. So what Prius and Sapphire will be doing is they'll be swapping out between being the main observer and the Oracle for a match. So the main observer will function just like it always has. They'll be, whoever's the main observer will decide which frags they want to watch, like switch around perspectives, etc. Whereas the Oracle is live into the match. So the main observer will be on a 2 to 5 second delay, I believe is what they said. And that's the stream that's going to be broadcast to both Twitch and to the screens in the arena, which means what everyone will be watching is actually 2 to 3 seconds behind what's actually happening. And that means that it does give the Oracle the ability to feed information to the main observer, which is what the intention of it is. That means that, let's say Prius is spectating Taco on B site Mirage, and Taco's about to grab a kill, but Fallen's about to grab a collateral at A ramp. So then Sapphire would be able to tell Prius that Fallen's about to grab this collateral, and it would be up to Prius whether he wants to switch or not. Generally in that situation, it's more than likely he'd switch, but it's really still the decision of the main observer whether they want to switch or not. So it's a bit of extra information. It's not like a black and white, the Oracle tells you it happens, right? So that'll allow them to capture a little bit more of the frags on stream and potentially build a better storyline, but my main issue with it comes from how it'll actually be, I guess, how it'll play out at the event itself. Because if you think about it, the screen over there is going to also be 3 to 5 seconds behind, which means that, let's say, Get Right is in a 1v2, and he grabs both kills extremely quickly. So we're assuming here that they haven't switched to like a live perspective on the screen that they have. So let's say Get Right grabs those 2 kills. He's going to jump up and celebrate, and the crowd won't see that he's pulled off that clutch for another 2 to 3 seconds, but they'll see him jumping up, which they'll be able to basically come to the conclusion that he did win the clutch, which ruins a lot of the tension that gets built in those kind of situations. And it'll also be extremely disconnected and weird from Get Right's perspective, because he's going to win that 1v2, and he's going to jump up, but then the crowd's going to sit there for another 2 seconds before they have any reaction whatsoever. And while you could say that Get Right could just wait 2 seconds, that makes no sense, because he's the one actually in the game pulling off that clutch, and it doesn't make sense for him to be like an actor, right? So basically there's going to be a massive disconnect between the crowd and like the audience at the event and the players who are playing there. And I think it'll be great from a stream perspective, because the player cams are going to be delayed. Everything's also going to be delayed by that same 2 to 5 seconds, whatever it is. But as far as actually being at the event for the players or for the audience, it's going to be a bit, I guess, weird is the only real word I can use to describe that, because they're going to feel that disconnect between the players celebrating and them celebrating, and vice versa. So from there, basically what their Reddit post outlined is the reason they did this is because at ESL1 Cologne, that they did a lot of the production for, they were super criticized for missing frags, or at least 4 missing frags. But if you actually go back and watch the VOD, that's not necessarily what it was. Like, in terms of capturing frags, I think they did a decent job. I think the main issue that they had was cutting away from the game too early. So for example, if a player's in a 1v3 and they're saving an up, and then they cut away from the player to a shot of the crowd, and then you don't know, like, did the player save the op? It's an important round, like a 12-11 round, and they've cut away. So that's incredibly crucial that you don't cut away from that. But it's an issue that a lot of tournament organizers had. It's not just PGL. You can't really blame them on that. There's also they had a couple of issues in terms of like having the observer on the wrong side of the map on an execute, but that happens occasionally. You can't really help it, unfortunately. They are mistakes that were made, obviously, but it's nothing that can't be worked on, really. And especially with Prius and Sapphire being the two main observers at the event, I think it'll be great. So I think while I really like the idea of the Oracle observing because it'll add on extra elements to observing, I think it'll create a bit too much of a disconnect between the players and the audience at an event. Now, what I do think they can do instead of something like that is, just because they have this adaptable HUD that they've built, they have these their own little basically entire HUD that they've built for the matches, and that's another post they've made. I can also link that in the description below. So what I think they can do with that is they can implement something that's a bit more interesting from an audience perspective, I guess. So basically what they could do is maybe something like a point of view round from a player. So let's say Kenny S is having an amazing game on Train. He's up like 20 frags in 12 rounds or something like that, right? Or 10 rounds, whatever. Maybe have a round where they take away a lot of the spectating HUD elements and they instead go to more of like a POV point of view for just Kenny S. So it'll be what he sees. Now, I'm not sure exactly how they'd work that in from like a spectating perspective, whether they're going to have X-ray still or just have it from like what Kenny sees until he dies. And I think it could be a really interesting twist to what a lot of broadcasts offer, because it would allow them to grab a bit more of the strategic element, a bit more of like the team play elements that you don't quite get when you're just casting and spectating a match as it is. I think that would also give the observers a break for like a round, because they don't have to swap off from someone until he dies. But that's more of a small point, because I just feel like the more tiny things like that that they can add onto a broadcast adds a lot more than something like Oracle observing does, in my own opinion, just because that delay, while it will help frags get captured, it's not always going to be followed, and it's also going to create that disconnect that I was saying earlier. So I think while I understand why PGL's gone about it the way they have, I'm not exactly sure how it'll come to fruition when it actually gets implemented. And they did say that if it doesn't work out, they can still swap it out anytime for the live replays, or sorry, for the live perspective, which I honestly think they will do after the first match or two, just because I don't see it working from an audience and player perspective. So those are just some of my thoughts. Love to get to know what people think.